Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the New South Wales Tender Round 7 webinar. My name is Jack Kratzer and I'm from our Corporate Affairs team here at ASL, and I will be facilitating today. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on whose lands we are all on today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend my respect to any First Nations people here with us today. I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So before we get into the substance of the presentation, there's just a few housekeeping matters to discuss. So everyone who has joined as a participant, your camera and microphone will be off. We will be using Slido to take questions today. So this can be accessed through the QR code that is shown on the slides, and this will stay on the slides through the presentation. You'll just see it up in the corner. If you are unable to access Slido or have any issues, please email your question to engagement@asl.org.au and a member of our team will put it into Slido for you. So we note that the project documents for this tender round have only just been released and we don't expect everyone to have properly digested them. For the Q&A session today, we often receive very technical or project-specific questions that can't really be answered appropriately without further information or due consideration. Our ask to you is that these types of questions are asked through the formal Q&A process, which is currently running and registered proponents have access to. This way, for those more technical or detailed questions, we can give it due consideration and thought and give you a more helpful answer than what we'll be able to give today. And finally, the webinar is being recorded and we will post it online in the coming days. We kindly ask that you do not use any AI recorders or transcriptors today, as they can disrupt the presentation. So moving on to who ASL is. ASL is an independent for-purpose service provider established to support the delivery of energy commitments made by governments that will transform Australia's energy system. We were established over 3 years ago with our foundational role as the New South Wales Consumer Trustee, and our work is focused on securing investment in new energy infrastructure that delivers positive energy system, consumer and community outcomes. From our foundational role as the New South Wales Consumer Trustee, which is the capacity we are speaking to you in today, we have also expanded to provide tender delivery services for the Australian Government's Capacity Investment Scheme, and recently, which some of you might have seen, support for the South Australian Government's Firm Energy Reliability Mechanism Scheme. So the purpose of today's discussion, today the team and I are here to talk to you about Tender Round 7 under the New South Wales Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap. I'm joined by my colleagues Sivi Boone, Lockie White and Timo Mueller from the commercial team, who you should hopefully be able to see on your screen. So today the team will provide an overview of Tender Round 7, including the background on the key tender objectives and dates. And as I'm sure you're all aware, this tender is a bit of a special one and doesn't fall in our regular tender cadence per our IAO report. So we'll provide an overview of the two products available in this tender round, the firming supply LTESA and demand response LTESA, and how they work, and we'll run through the overview of our assessment framework and some key items to consider when preparing your bid. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have the team on hand for some Q&A. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Sivi Boone now, who will get us started with the substance of the presentation. Sivi.
Thank you, Jack, and good afternoon, everyone. Tender Round 7 is the second tender round in the New South Wales Roadmap to offer firming supply and demand response LTESs, and the first New South Wales tender round to adopt a single-stage tender process. ASL has been directed by the New South Wales Minister for Climate Change and Energy to conduct a competitive tender for a minimum of 500 megawatts of firming infrastructure. This direction is the result of a forecast shortfall for the summer of 2027 to 2028 identified in the 2024 ESTM report. Projects that are located in the Sydney-Newcastle-Wollongong sub-region and can demonstrate a credible pathway to achieving their commercial operations date prior to November 2027 will be prioritised in this tender round. Tender Round 7 is open to all eligible projects in the New South Wales region of the NEM that satisfy the eligibility criteria outlined in the tender guidelines. These eligibility criteria include, but are not limited to, projects that have a minimum project capacity of 20 megawatts or a combination of aggregated components that total 20 megawatts, projects that are or will be scheduled with AEMO and can be dispatched through AEMO's central dispatch in the New South Wales region of the NEM. Aggregated projects are eligible to bid in this tender round too. Further detail on considerations for aggregated projects will be discussed later in the presentation, noting that some of the eligibility criteria differ for those projects. I would recommend referring to the tender guidelines for the full list and details of eligibility criteria, noting that these differ slightly between demand response LTESs and firming supply LTESs. Our last firming infrastructure tender was in Tender Round 2. Tender Round 2 saw a diverse range of firming supply and demand response projects succeeding in receiving LTESs. Successful projects included 2 BESS projects with storage capacity equivalent to 2 hours duration, 1 4-hour duration BESS project, and 3 demand response projects, as you can see on this slide. As shown in the timeline on the screen, there are several important dates to consider throughout the tender. Registration closes on the 6th of November, while Q&A closes on the 18th of November. Finally, bid submissions will close on the 27th of November, and we expect successful bids to be announced in April or May next year. Over to Lockie now.
Thank you very much, Sivi. And so I'll begin with talking through what products are available in this tender. So the LTESA is in itself an options contract designed to solve the missing money problem for firming projects. There's 2 versions of the project documents which are available online and available for Tender Round 7 for bidding. That is the firming supply LTESA and the demand response LTESA, and they serve different needs or different project types. Fundamentally, the commercial structures underneath both of them are identical. The LTESA provides a capped annuity payment available as a top-up to a project's net operational revenues designed to mitigate cash flow volatility and improve forecast revenues for a project. It provides increased revenue certainty and support, and it's designed to attract further investment for a project. The default contract term in this tender round has been increased from the 10 years that was available in Tender Round 2 up to 15 years as the maximum potential contract term that may be bid. The LTESA itself does not replace other revenue streams, instead it supports them. The LTESA is specifically designed as a revenue top-up mechanism which doesn't restrict a project's operating strategy. Instead, proponents and operators eventually are encouraged to respond to all valuable revenue opportunities even while that LTESA support is available in an annuity period. The design also includes a repayment mechanism, which we'll show an example of in 2 slides' time, but this implies or causes there to be sharing of revenues which are capped by historical net payments that have otherwise been received, and it's only sharing of upside in excess of a certain net revenue threshold. The repayment mechanism and that structure where we've capped the potential repayment to historical net payments ensures that the project is always better off having an LTESA. The LTESA also provides for risk sharing for changes in law. The LTESA is designed to enable projects to bid the financial support required to achieve a final investment decision and meet those investment hurdles. And it's the tender process which is designed to find which bids provide the highest value and minimize cost to New South Wales electricity customers. Into the next slide, which is firming LTESA key products, I'll talk to the relevant key commercial terms, which will be used in the payment example as well. These are the contract term, net revenue threshold, annuity cap, and net operational revenue. I'll also talk to performance obligations that apply. The contract term, which appears at the top of the table, is a period over which options to enter into annuity periods, which offer that support, are available under an LTESA. This may be up to 15 years for any technology, but it could also be bid to a shorter number as well. The net revenue threshold is an amount above which additional provisions apply for the annuity payments and repayment mechanism. The annuity cap is the second bid variable here, and it sets the maximum annual LTESA payment per year that may be paid to the project. The net operational revenue is, simply put, all revenues earned by the project, netted off against permitted costs, and before considering the LTESA payments. And I'd refer you to the LTESAs themselves for more details on inclusions and exclusions there. So you'll see the fourth item then is performance obligations, and it's not a bid term in itself, but it is a key commercial term. Performance obligations align with the key tender objective of projects being awarded an LTESA where they can contribute to improving New South Wales system reliability. The LTESA includes economic incentives for projects to be available and to respond during times of system stress and throughout a year. Projects will be required to respond to LOR 2 and 3 events or lack of reserve. And there's a minimum notice period of 6 hours before financial rebates may apply under the LTESA, and those would only apply due to underperformance against certain targets which are set in the LTESA itself. Best endeavours obligations would apply if the market notice for an upcoming LOR 2 or 3 event was not provided. And proponents, again, I would encourage you to review the firming LTESA for further details on the effect through which the rebates apply. Into this new slide, I'll talk through the structure and provide a few example years or payment mechanic demonstrations. In example year 1, which is shown on the left-hand side, we've set a line as the net revenue threshold, which is shown as the top or upper grey line. And then there's an annuity cap, which is the difference between that NRT and the blue dotted line. In example year 1, we see the net operational revenues are equal to the net revenue threshold minus annuity cap. The annuity cap is paid in full in order for the sum of revenues to meet the net revenue threshold. In example year 2, the project earns higher revenues than in example year 1, and the annuity cap is only partially paid. Again, it's intended to bridge the gap to the net revenue threshold. In example year 3, now we'll see how the repayment mechanism works, and the project's net operational revenues are forecast to exceed, or they do exceed, the net revenue threshold provided in that bid, and none of the annuity cap is paid. The LTESA payment, therefore, is 0. Depending on historical support that had been received by the project to date, the project may have to make a repayment of some amount of the excess by which net operational revenues exceed the net revenue threshold, and it's a 50% sharing of that upside. Again, that's capped by historical net payments. I'll now pass back to Sibi.
Okay. So as flagged in our market briefing note, a single stage process will be implemented for the first time in New South Wales roadmap tenders in this tender. Those of you who have participated in previous tenders will know that we previously had multiple stages of assessment, and proponents submitted a bid at stage A and then, if successful, a financial value bid at stage B. Our new approach, the single stage tender approach, consolidates the evaluation of eligibility, financial and non-financial value criteria into one comprehensive bid stage. This one-stage process has been designed to reduce the tender duration, ensuring successful projects are awarded LTESAs sooner. It also simplifies the submission requirements and means there is a longer window for you to prepare your bid. As mentioned earlier, Tender Round 7 is now live, and I would encourage all potential proponents to refer to the tender guidelines, which are the authoritative source of information. To the extent of any inconsistency between this presentation and the content of the tender guidelines will prevail. Also, any questions asked today will be provided to registered proponents along with their answers through Smarty Grants. I'll now discuss bid assessment. We will assess bids against the eligibility criteria and merit criteria outlined in the tender guidelines. Under the one-stage model, we have a simplified assessment from 8 merit criteria to 5 merit criteria, as outlined on the slide. While each merit criterion is weighted differently, we are looking for the delivery of high-quality projects that perform well across all merit criteria. Again, I would recommend referring to the tender guidelines for the full details of the merit criteria, noting that these differ slightly between demand response LTESs and firming supply LTESs in their application. Moving on to the specific requirements of each merit criteria, MC1 will assess a project's ability to contribute to system reliability, its ability to reduce wholesale electricity prices, the forecast costs of the LTESA, the system strength contribution of the project, and its contribution to system security services. Projects are assessed against several future scenarios to determine the value they provide to New South Wales electricity consumers. It is expected that firming projects can provide significant wholesale market benefits in scenarios where prices are volatile or remain high for extended periods, and can reduce reliability risk, including when all New South Wales coal has retired or during lulls in variable renewable energy. Please refer to the MC1 market briefing note, which lists conditions for a project's contribution towards EST. For example, not being classified as existing, committed or anticipated as per the July 2025 AEMO Generation Information Update. Wholesale demand response units not to be registered with AEMO before 30 July 2025 and have not already reached final investment decision by the end of July 2025. The key metrics for scoring in the MC1 assessment are expected to be the reliability contribution and wholesale market benefit to cost ratio. MC1 is a critical element of the bid assessment, carrying a weighting of 40%. Moving on to MC2, MC2 looks at the project's pathway and progress towards reaching financial close and commercial operations by November 2027, a deadline required to meet the forecast EST gap. This includes risks to timely project completion, as well as the project's progress towards securing all required approvals, land and connection agreements. MC3 looks at the capability, contracting delivery model and financing strategy of the proponent and relevant entities to successfully deliver the project. MC4, meanwhile, looks at the quality of the proponent's approach to engaging the local community and First Nations groups, including evidence of engagement undertaken to date, the proponent's understanding of any project impacts on the community, and the tailored approach to minimize and offset any impacts on the community. Importantly, MC4 has a mandatory returnable schedule to complete as part of the project bid submission, which will become contractually binding if a proponent is successful in this tender. For further guidance on this MC, proponents can refer to the social license market briefing note on the ASL website. MC5 assesses a project's contribution to a reduction in Scope 1 emissions in the New South Wales electricity sector and is unique to firming tenders. As I mentioned before, more information on this can be found in the tender guidelines. Back to you, Lockie.
Thank you again, Sivi. Now I'll run through some of the key items to consider for this tender round 7. And we'll begin with reliability and the energy security target. And from time to time, we'll use that acronym EST throughout the rest of the pack. So I'd like to start by introducing 2 critical considerations for this tender. These are a project's contribution to the reliability standard and contribution to reliability in New South Wales, and the energy security target, or EST. Firming infrastructure provides value to New South Wales electricity customers or consumers by contributing to both of these limbs or elements shown. The left branch of the diagram shows the contribution to reliability. A project contributes to reliability by reducing modelled unserved energy, or USE, and the contribution to reliability will be explicitly assessed as part of merit criteria 1. Moving over to the right branch of the diagram, a project's contribution towards the energy security target will be assessed separately as a strategic consideration and it's expected that competitive projects provide a high contribution to the EST. The assessment of contribution towards EST will leverage advice from the Energy Security Target Monitor and latest available data and workbooks. In the tender guidelines, we've provided guidance on the features of a project that would allow it to provide a contribution to each of these two items. In summary, there's conditions around network location, duration, and when you reached final investment decision. Now I'll deep dive into meeting the reliability standard and contribution towards reliability. ASL in this tender assessment will assess projects' contribution to system reliability in New South Wales as part of Merit Criteria 1, Financial Value and System Benefits. This is expected to be an important driver of outcomes. Again, noting it will have a high weighting on the final Merit Criteria weighted score. A project's contribution to system reliability will be assessed through its modelled reduction to unserved energy in New South Wales, which is driven by network location and dispatch duration. The focus of this assessment will be on near-term risks to New South Wales reliability in line with the tender's focus. System reliability will be modelled or will be based on modelling that draws on methodologies employed by AEMO's Electricity Statement of Opportunities, the ESU. On this slide, we show a figure 1 in the middle of the screen and a table 1 to the right-hand side. These are both in the tender guidelines for reference. There are two key parameters of interest for these projects in assessing contribution to reliability. Again, that is location and duration. For location, it's referable to that figure 1 shown in the middle, and duration to the table on the right. Projects that are located in areas with high locational reliability factors and longer dispatch durations are expected to have higher relative reliability benefits, all else being equal, and this can be indicated by the project's firmness factor. The calculation of project firmness factor is also shown in the tender guidelines for reference. Now into the next slide, I'll talk through the contribution towards EST. ASL, acting as the consumer trustee, will consider the EST forecast and advice from the Energy Security Target Monitor to assess each project's contribution towards closing any forecast EST gaps that have been identified and have led to this tender being announced. A project's contribution towards EST is considered as a strategic consideration in the assessment of bids, and the intent is to ensure that projects are able to effectively address risks in meeting the EST in 2027-28, and that all projects across the tender successfully close that gap. For a project to be considered favourable, they must meet the following conditions. Not classified as existing, committed, or anticipated as per the July 25 AEMO Generation Information Update. For projects below 5 megawatts, where they're not ordinarily recorded as part of AEMO Gen Info, they would have not reached final investment decision by 31st of July 2025. For demand response, they should not include wholesale demand response units that were registered with AEMO by 31 July 2025. And projects should be located in the Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong subregion or in other subregions where the project is modelled to be able to contribute to the EST. The next slide will talk to aggregated and demand response projects. Aggregated projects and demand response as technology types are eligible and encouraged to bid in this tender round. For the purpose of this tender, an aggregated project is defined as an aggregation of components of the same technology type, e.g. standalone BESS, where components themselves may be less than 20 megawatts, but combined, the aggregate project size for an aggregated project meets the minimum project capacity of 20 megawatts AC. Encouraging aggregated projects to participate in this tender round is purposeful and it is designed to reflect the tender objectives of supporting flexible, decentralized solutions to help address the forecast EST gap. Now into demand response projects. These are loads capable of being scheduled in the wholesale demand response mechanism. They must consist of wholesale demand response units which have not previously been registered in the WDRM and are not participating in the New South Wales Peak Demand Response Scheme. So they are not participating in the New South Wales Peak Demand Response Scheme. One other item to note would be that proponents are able to allocate parts of the capacity of very large WDRUs to an LTESA. The details of that are provided in the demand response LTESA itself. Given the nature of aggregated projects and demand response, assessment considerations will differ slightly. For example, some of the eligibility requirements to provide, say, a connection inquiry response will have been removed for distribution connected aggregated projects and for demand response as well. Please refer to the tender guidelines for a full breakdown of considerations for aggregated projects and demand response projects, and it will also be flagged through the bid form which things you need to provide information for. I'll now summarize with what a good firming infrastructure bid should demonstrate, and that is compliance with all proponent and project eligibility criteria as outlined in the tender guidelines. Good projects have an ability to be operational by 30 November 2027 and can demonstrate a reasonable pathway to that. They'll have an ability to provide a contribution to EST and also a contribution to reliability in New South Wales, specifically by being a project in the very targeted network locations that we're looking for that have higher locational reliability factors and may also have a longer duration. A competitive financial value bid includes being low cost, and that relates to its bid terms, including having a low annuity cap, a low net revenue threshold, bidding for a shorter contract term than the maximum that may be allowed, and there's also a benefits assessment. So the benefits will look at strong network location for a project, longer duration, and the ability to provide system security benefits through services. Finally, projects should be locally engaged. They should have social license commitments that are both actionable and measurable. Thank you, and I'll now pass to Jack to talk to next steps.
Thanks, Lockie. So we're getting very close to the end. The team's churned through it. So a few final things before we wrap up the presentation. A reminder that the tender is currently open for bids. Our proponents are required to create an account via the online portal to register a project and submit a bid. All relevant documentation for Tender Round 7 can be found on our website, the ASL website. The tender guidelines are the primary source of information and contain all the information necessary for you to participate in this tender. As I mentioned earlier, the formal Q&A process is currently running and will close on the 18th of November 2025. Proponents who have submitted a registration form will be able to access the Q&A platform through the online portal. And also, as mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be uploaded to our website in the coming days, and we will let everyone know when that is available. And finally, a reminder that bids close on the 27th of November 2025, so there's still plenty of time to get your bid in. So that concludes the formal part of our presentation today. We'll now move on to the Q&A. As I mentioned earlier, those questions, if any, that are really technical or project specific, they are best suited to go through the formal Q&A process. So if questions of this nature are asked today, we may take them on notice depending on the substance of the question and instead publish responses to them through the Q&A. So we'll now move over to Slido so we can see the Q&A. So we've had a few questions coming through, and I think the good thing is if we get through the questions in the next 5-10 minutes or so, we'll let everyone go early and you can all have time for a coffee before your next meeting. So Sivi, we'll start with you. I know this was mentioned earlier in the presentation, but perhaps if you could just reiterate and go back to provide the colour around it, around what the COD cutoff date is for this tender and why it is there.
Thank you, Jack. So the COD cutoff date. So as I mentioned earlier in the slides in the webinar, projects must be able to demonstrate that they will be operational by 30 November 2027. And this is to ensure that projects successful in this tender round can contribute towards the EST capacity shortfall forecast for the summer of 2027 to 2028, which was identified in the 2024 ESTM report and is the reason that we're actually conducting this tender.
Thanks, Sivi. So the next one for you, Lockie. My project can be modified to run at varying capacity or duration. Can projects be configured this way, or can I submit a bid with different options in it? So I think the crux of that is, can I put forward a few different options and you select the one you like best, or do I need to select specifically the configuration of my project for the bid?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question. So there's probably a lack of flexibility in a sense here for fairness through tender. Proponents must register and submit one set of configurations per project for the bid. Projects with multiple potential configurations or designs, such as capacity or storage duration variations, should select their preferred configuration prior to registering and submitting that bid. This is outlined in section 3.1.2, registration in tender guidelines.
Thanks, Lockie. We'll stick with you for the next one, which is that my project is not in the SNW sub-region, but is in New South Wales. Am I still able to participate? I know you went through this just a little bit earlier, but maybe if you could provide and just reiterate a bit of the color around that map we had up on screen that sort of showed the different locational factors.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question again. So for projects outside of that Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong sub-region, they can still participate. So it's not excluded at all. You should participate, and projects with a relatively higher locational reliability factor would perform better in the assessment in MC1. So that locational factor is referable to particularly that figure 29 from AMO's ISU, which was also shown as figure 1 throughout the pack today, and in the tender guidelines as well. And you're able to be able to see that strong network locations aren't limited to that SNW subregion. Instead, it's a little bit more spread out, looking at key transmission lines in New South Wales and an ability for your project generation to get to load centres at times of need and times of system stress.
Thanks, Lockie. I will give you a break and go to Sivi now with the next question. So Sivi, this one is a proponent that's asking, they were awarded an LTESA contract in a different storage round. Can I still bid?
And the answer to that is no. I'd refer the proponents to have a look at the eligibility criteria, which can actually outline specifically what the requirements are in terms of the projects and the proponents.
Thanks, Sivi. We'll stick with you as well. So the next one about community engagement, community impact. My demand response project will have minimal community impact. Do I still need to respond to MC4 at all?
Sorry, just struggling to unmute myself. That's a really good question. So yes, demand response projects are still required to submit a complete bid and will be assessed against all merit criteria. However, please see sections 3.4 and 4.2 of the tender guidelines for special assessment considerations for demand response projects, such as the removal of the requirement to provide a community engagement plan. Back to you,
Thanks,
Jack.
Sivi. We'll go back to Lockie now for the next one. And Lockie, that is, can I get a firming LTESA for an aggregated facility which consists of both batteries and gas peaker plants?
Yep. Good question. And the answer is that for the purposes of this tender round, an aggregated project is one that has the same technology type for each of its component facilities. And there's a section in the tender guidelines as well that will talk to that. And I think it's 3.4 of the tender guidelines themselves.
Thank you. And the next one also for you, Lockie, so don't go off mute just yet. Am I still able to participate if my demand response project is already registered in the wholesale demand response mechanism, but I do not receive any financial support?
Good question. And so that one is referable to those conditions that we sort of laid out for contribution to EST and reliability. As per the eligibility criteria in the tender guidelines, participating projects and for demand response cannot already be scheduled in wholesale demand response mechanism or participating in that New South Wales peak demand response scheme. So we're looking for new and additional projects, including demand response abilities.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lockie. We'll give you a break now and go to you, Sivi. Our bid entity will be established in the coming months. How do we submit our registration if we don't have a bid entity to be the proponent?
Thanks, Jack. Another really good question. I think proponents can refer to section 5.19 of the tender guidelines for the requirements for registration and signing of the tender process deed when the bid entity has not yet been established. And please note that the bid entity must be incorporated prior to execution of the LTESs.
Excellent. Thanks, Sivi. Lockie, back to you now. I have a hybrid project with both a solar and battery storage element. Do both parts need to be up and running by November 2027? Also, when in November 2027?
Good question and good clarification as well. So proponents may submit in this tender an assessed or non-assessed hybrid bid, and our assessment will differ then by the basis on which you are contracting through the LTESA, and an assessed hybrid is one that's committing to build both components under the LTESA. For the assessment then, proponents must be committing to deliver both components of that hybrid under the PDA by 30 November 2027. So you've got to commit to build both, and it's by 30 November 2027. And I think there's a drafting note in the PDA itself that indicates that date as well for consistency.
Thanks, Lockie. One more for you. My project consists of some batteries that are under 5 megawatts, and therefore they all don't need a CER. Am I still able to bid?
Yep, good question. So with reference then to the slide a couple of slides ago, there are special considerations for aggregated projects. So we sort of know or understand that some of these features won't apply, including needing to have a connection inquiry response. Instead, we would look for you to provide relevant agreements with a network service provider for the components. So you should still demonstrate a pathway to connection and your progress there. We want to look for the most similar documents, even though initially it sort of seems strict as connection inquiry response. You should give us what information is most equivalent for your project and type.
Great, thanks, Lockie. Sivi, on to you. Under MC3 social value, in all the relevant questions, what is the definition of local? i.e., is it within a kilometre radius of your project? Is it within New South Wales? Is it in Australia?
Thanks, Jack. So the definition is actually included in the tender guidelines, and it is goods or services produced, manufactured and supplied within Australia and New Zealand. That's what is considered local content. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Sivi. So the next one is about the Energy Security Corporation, which is obviously a relatively newish entity within the New South Wales ecosystem that's doing some great work. So can the Energy Security Corporation support these deals with low-cost debt? They say they can, but your slide guidance suggests otherwise. And I've got the floor, so I'll take that one. And I think it might be referring to the slide around the eligibility criteria for revenue support. And effectively, that criteria is there to make sure that projects aren't receiving multiple avenues of revenue support from government programs such as the LTESA program or the CIS program. In terms of this question, look, that's a question for the Energy Security Corporation. And whilst they also do work in New South Wales and under the roadmap, we aren't able to answer these questions on their behalf. So I would suggest that that question is raised with them directly. Oh no, sorry, more questions coming in just in the nick of time. So as you know, the Tender 6 long duration storage assessment is still ongoing. What will be the decision if the same project is awarded in Tender 6 and Tender 7? So I'll flick that one to you, Timo. I think what they're asking is if a project currently has a bid in Tender 6 and then submits one for Tender 7 as well, what happens if they're successful in Tender 6?
Yeah, I think on that one, referring to the tender guidelines in Tender 6, with your bid, you have provided a process bond and a bid bond. So currently, we would assume if you, or like we would, like the expectation is, if you're awarded in Tender 6, then you have to honor that that agreement.
Fantastic. Thanks, Timo. So next question back to you, Lockie. The initial market briefing noted that the tender size was indicative and based on D-rated capacity. Is this still the case?
Good question. So the indicative tender size remains at 500 megawatts, and the CT or consumer trustee, ASL, maintains discretion to go above or below in terms of award based on tender information, the bids received, and the long-term interest of New South Wales electricity customers as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lockie. So it looks like we might be at the end of our questions. I'll just give it maybe 10, 15 seconds while I chat in case anyone has any other questions they would like to ask. Otherwise, we can wrap up early and give everyone some time back in their day.
And Jack, I wonder if it's worth reminding people who are registered proponents that they can still ask questions through the Q&A process.
Yes, definitely. Maybe I'll do that now as part of a bit of a pre-wrap up before we call it and give everyone a chance to ask some more questions if needed. So look, as I said before we jumped into the Q&A, a reminder that bids are currently open. The Q&A process is also open, and this is a formal Q&A process. You register to submit a bid and you get access to, and that's where you can ask us those detailed nitty-gritty questions if need be, or if there's any confusion as you're working through your bid. So as I said, registrations are now open and close the 6th of November. Bids close the 27th of November, and you must be registered in order to submit a bid. So if you're thinking about submitting a bid, make sure you get in before that registration cutoff date. This webinar recording will go on our website in the coming days, and we'll send out an EDM letting everyone know when it is live so you can refer back to it if need be. So it looks like there's no more questions coming in, which means we can call it early and everyone can get on with their days. But a big thank you to everyone for joining. We appreciate your time, we appreciate your support, and we look forward to receiving your bids. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.